This is an advertisement by BetterHelp. January arrives with a sense of expectation and change. But real change is rarely loud or dramatic.
It's noticing what no longer needs to be there. Thoughts you keep turning over even when they're not helping.
And when you live with those long enough, they can start to feel normal until you pause and see them more clearly. That's where perspective helps. Not fixing yourself, just creating space to understand what's been weighing you down.
Therapy can offer that space, a clearer view of your own patterns and what's worth holding on to. BetterHelp makes starting straightforward. You answer a few questions and they match you with a qualified therapist. If it doesn't feel right, you can switch at any time.
Whether you're into New Year's resolutions or not, working to better yourself is something everyone should do. And you don't even need to bulldoze your life to do it. Simply use BetterHelp.
BetterHelp makes it easy to get matched online with a qualified therapist. Sign up and get 10% off at betterhelp.com/restishistory. That's betterhelp.com/restishistory.
This podcast is brought to you by Carvana. Car shopping shouldn't feel like preparing for a marathon of paperwork. That's why Carvana makes buying and financing your car easy. From start to finish, search thousands of vehicles with great prices. All online, all on your time. And when you're ready, your new car shows up right at your door. It doesn't get better than that. Buy your car the easy way. On Carvana. Delivery fees may apply.
Adobe Acrobat Studio, your new foundation. Use PDF spaces to generate a presentation. Grab your docs, your permits, your moves. AI levels up your pitch, gets it in a groove. Choose a template with your timeless cool. Come on now, let's flex those tools. Draft, design, deliver, make it sing. AI builds the deck so you can build that thing. Do that, do that, do that with Acrobat.
Learn more at adobe.com/do-that-with-Acrobat.
Growing up as a football-crazed little boy in the 1970s and 1980s, I adored the World Cup. I zealously collected the Panini stickers, painstakingly circled the fixtures in my parents' copy of the Radio Times, and watched goggle-eyed as Zico, Socrates and Maradona pirouetted across our television screen. Sadly, today it is simply impossible to look forward to Brazil's carnival of football with the same innocent enthusiasm. The greatest sporting exhibition on the planet has become a bloated monstrosity. Far from embodying the Corinthian virtues of athletic excellence and fair play, the World Cup has become synonymous with corporate greed, institutional corruption, and the widening gulf between the international super-rich and the downtrodden masses. That, Dominic Sambrook, was a top historian harumphing in the Daily Mail before the World Cup in Brazil in 2014, and the top historian was, of course, yourself.
It was beautiful prose, Tom. Not just powerful, but beautifully written, I think.
Very, very thought-provoking. But
our guest is laughing scornfully, I will
but say. Dominic, we finished our sweep through the World Cup in our last episode in Argentina in 1978. And you could say that there was a lot of corporate greed there. There was certainly quite a lot of institutional corruption. Yeah. And you know, the Argentine government were busing shanty people out to shanty towns, where they weren't playing fixtures. So plus ça change, basically, isn't it? Between Brazil and Qatar today, I mean,
absolutely right.
Has anything changed much?
When you look at the two episodes we have already done, it's obvious that the World Cup has been associated from the very beginning with state building, with nationalism, with money, obviously, because football has always been associated with money, and with politics. So when people say, let's keep politics out of sports, politics has never been out of the World Cup. But I think it's certainly true, I would say, that in the last, let's say, 30 years or so, the sort of corporate stranglehold over the World Cup has been stronger and stronger. The sense of it being this sort of, there was a slight hint of innocence, wasn't there, about those 1930s?
Yeah, a bit.
Certainly 1930, the very first one.
Apart from Mussolini,
not the bits from Mussolini. But yeah, it's a really interesting question about how this 1920s, 1930s product, the World Cup, where it sees itself in the 21st century, and is it just a vehicle for corporate investment and for dictators and so on?
But I think what you would also say is that it has grown in significance even greater than it was, say, in the 60s or 70s. And historians, I guess, in 100 years' time, looking back at this period, will see the World Cup as an absolutely central part of making sense of the geopolitics of this period. And I think that when you're studying a kind of a major aspect of history, all the way through the episodes we've done, we've been hamstrung by our inability to actually have figures from the period of history that we're discussing actually on the show. So when we did
Pele didn't join us, sadly.
Well, but when we did the Battle of Trafalgar, we didn't have Nelson. We did the Conquest of Alexander. He couldn't turn up. But for this, we're going into, the 80s, the 90s, the 21st century World Cup. We have a top figure from history on our show, do we not?
We do indeed. So for our American, Australian listeners, people who are not interested in football, he'll take a tiny bit of introduction. All our British listeners and our European listeners will know him immediately. He was born in 1960. He's from Leicester. He's the face of crisps, or as Americans would say, chips. So that will give his identity away straight away. He was the top scorer in the 1986 World Cup, won the Golden Boot. He went on to captain his country, to captain England. And ever since retiring, he has been really the media face of football, not just in England, I think, but one of the absolutely central sort of media faces of football around the world. And it is, of course, Gary Lineker. Gary, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Great to be on.
So we're talking about you as a historical figure, which
that's how old
in
I
the
am
most
now.
flattering sense.
In the most flattering way.
sense.
Exactly. Just as we were talking about Alexander the Great or Nelson, as Tom says. So you're born in 1960 in Leicester. You're from a family of greengrocers, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, my dad was a market trader, sold fruit.
So do you remember, so you're too young to remember watching England in 1966, I suppose. But
Sadly, yes.
1970?
70 was my first World Cup, I remember that, which was obviously in Mexico. And it was a very colourful and great World Cup. And one of my first ever memories was England probably playing Brazil in the group stage. And it was the game where Banks pulled off the remarkable save from Pele's header. He scooped it over the bar. And then latterly in the tournament, which was England got to the quarterfinals and played against West Germany, as it was then, of course. And England were 2 up. Now, my dad, who I said was a fruiter and market trader, worked really hard all hours, but they'd take a day off sometimes, and he'd have every week they would have a card game at the house, and my mum kind of hosted and did a bit, and they gave her a few quid every now and again for that. And there was like 6-7 blokes in the house every Monday, and they'd go all night until next morning they'd go to work or whatever. And on this, and it never stopped for anything. But this one night they did stop to watch England play against Germany, and we were 2 up, and thought we were going to win, and then Germany came back and won in extra time 3-2. And I was crying, and I remember my dad and, amongst others, Engelbert Humperdinck was one of the players playing cards in my house.
Engelbert Humperdinck?
He used to come around. I know it's bizarre.
Wow.
Jerry Dorsey, as he was known back then, but Engel, as he was known to everyone in our house. So he came round, and then I was in tears, floods of tears with England losing, because I was only, 9 years old. And they just went, right, let's get back and play cards then. And they started and carried on all night. It didn't happen. So it's in my...
Did Engelbert give a song to cheer you up?
I don't think he probably did.
Oh, disappointing.
Wow. Well, that was unexpected.
Yes.
So we've done 1978. So the next World Cup is in Spain in 1982. And obviously geopolitics are a massive factor in that for Britain and for Argentina. Because, Dominic, what's the state of play in the Falklands as the World Cup goes on?
Falklands, there was some talk before the tournament of should the British teams pull out? So that's England, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Should Argentina pull out because they're fighting this war?
Didn't Jimmy Greaves say that they should have a home nations tournament and the money should go to servicemen?
Jimmy Greaves, so for those people who don't know, who was a former striker, brilliant striker, but had become a pundit. But pundits in the 1980s, he was no stranger to outlandish suggestions on TV. But they didn't pull out, obviously, and the war ended, I think, the day after the tournament started. The other thing is that the draw they had one of those incredibly complicated draws that they had at times.
Oh, with little boys, wasn't it?
With but they had a series of groups. So you were in one group, then you were in another group.
Yeah, there was a double group stage then, wasn't there? Going all the way down the tournament, because England got to the second group stage and then they didn't lose, but they also didn't score.
Yeah.
And it was kind of a bizarre concept that going from one group stage and then into another group stage to get the two finalists.
But what that meant was we weren't
semi-finalists.
We didn't play Argentina.
No,
it would be it would be very unlikely that we would.
Was that gerrymandered?
I don't think so. I don't think it was gerrymandered. I mean, I think the draws. There's often been suggestions about draws being gerrymandered to favour the hosts, but I don't think this one was. I might be wrong. I mean, there's always conspiracy theories about all World Cup draws.
They are. The hot balls in the pot.
Are the hot balls, Gary?
No. Well, not from my experience. They're all pretty cold.
Right. That's good.
I've done the odd draw in my time.
So Gary, you had started as a professional footballer by 1982, hadn't you? Playing for Leicester.
Yeah, I was playing for Leicester. I was kind of a slow developer. I didn't break into the England team until I was in my mid-20s, 24, 25.
Yeah, 84, you started playing for England?
84 was, my debut, which I came on at Hampden Park against Scotland. Came on for Glenn Hoddle in the last 10 minutes. And then I didn't really play again until probably 85, really. And then I started scoring.
And then the World Cup. So as a player, I mean, for those people, many, many listeners who don't know much about football and probably are not massively invested in football, how much does the World Cup loom for you genuinely as a professional? Is it the be all and end all? Is it this dream, or is it just another?
Oh, no, it's huge. It's the biggest stage you can possibly play on as a footballer. You could argue whether it's the best competition to play in now because the Champions League is so incredibly strong. And club football, often they're probably better sides overall. But for a player, for an individual, it's the pinnacle to represent first your country and then secondly your country at a World Cup. And it really is incredibly special. And it is also to this day, I think players, even, with the money they earn, it doesn't matter, representing your country genuinely does make you feel incredibly proud.
So just to jump in, that thing about representing your country. So the thing that often annoys fans is they'll see of a club team is they'll say the player will, kiss the badge, give everything for their, Huddersfield Town or whatever. And then what do you know? A week later, he's moved to Luton and he's kissing that badge too. So there's a degree of cynicism, but playing for your country, when you're singing the anthem, all that stuff. Yeah. I mean, does it really, or are people cynical about that behind the scenes?
I don't think so. Sometimes you'll get, when the team's not playing very well, and particularly in a tournament like that, you'll often get the mud thrown at you for not trying, and they're not competing hard enough. And it's never that. Sometimes it can be that you care too much and the pressure becomes too much for some players. But generally, every player gives everything to be in this tournament. And it's one of those, particularly the World Cup we've got coming up now, is that, we're playing right up to the World Cup. So loads of players are getting injured last minute and missing out, which is a real shame. So, yes, it sounds a bit pathetic, but, to say that it's so important, but it genuinely does matter. And it's.
And do you think also part of that is that, it is this kind of regular every 4 years, and each World Cup is remembered and commemorated. So that if you pull in a brilliant performance, you will be a part of this folklore. You'll become part of it. It's really the best opportunity you have to become internationally significant.
Absolutely. I mean, take my own personal situation. When I went, my first World Cup that I played in was 86 in Mexico. And that transformed my life. I went into it as a player that was just breaking through, had a couple of good seasons, won the Golden Boot in England for Leicester and then Everton. And then I went to the World Cup, and I was known back in England, but then I played in the World Cup, and I finished top scorer in the competition, won the Golden Boot, and life changed. Suddenly I was on a plane. I was on my way to Barcelona to sign and play for them for 3 years. So it is a thing that can launch your career in many ways, and it certainly did mine.
Just that thing about going to Mexico. I mean, for people of certainly my age and Tom's age, Mexico feels like the sort of the canonical place where you have to have World Cups, because 1970 was in Mexico, the Pele World Cup, then the Maradona and Lineker World Cup in 86.
I think just the Maradona World Cup.
Well, it's good to butter up the guests, isn't it, Tom?
Absolutely.
So Mexico, but somebody from, as you say, from Leicester, the market trading background, all that stuff, to go to Mexico, which basically British people didn't go to. I mean, were you just so much in the football bubble that you didn't kind of notice, or was it as mad and outlandish as it kind of sounds?
It was really, but at the time, as you quite rightly say, you are in a bubble. And we did go there the year before to compete in a little mini tournament just to try and
acclimatise,
get a feel, acclimatise, that sort of thing. And obviously, Mexico at that stage as well. I've watched these series of Narcos, on that. It's like, I had no idea that was going on, that kind of stuff. You have mass killings and the drug wars and the cartels and all this stuff was in its height at that particular point. And I used to wonder, I remember when we were there, I wondered why we had this amazing kind of security details with outriding bikes with massive guns driving around with us everywhere we went. When I saw that series, it made sense.
Well, because I guess the world then was less globalized. So it was much less connected. Countries like Mexico, if you're European, were more foreign, I guess.
Yeah, it was. I remember, though, it was a beautiful place. And we had to acclimatize, and it's because of a lot of Mexico is quite high. It's like altitude. Mexico City, for example, where we ended up playing last 16 in the quarterfinal. Prior to that, though, we had to play in Monterrey, which was a lot lower, but it was incredibly hot. We played 3 games there in the daytime. I think 2 of the games were at midday and 1 at 4:00, or it might be the other way around. But we were playing in 40 odd degrees centigrade. And it was, nowadays they would, I don't know whether they'd even allow that. It'd be too dangerous. But it was, so we had to acclimatize, and we went before we went to Colorado for altitude training, etc. But we also had to train for the extreme heat. And I remember Bobby Robson decided that we should all train in a steam room. So we were doing all press-ups and jump squats and all these things in a steam room to get used to.
That is very
elite.
That's my idea of hell, Tom. And you were only allowed 1 call a week home, is that true?
Well, yeah, obviously no mobile phones back then. And, sometimes we discussed the boredom of players pre-World Cup when you spend a few weeks together before the actual thing starts. So you got to keep yourself entertained. But yeah, there were no mobile phones, no computer games, no laptops, there's very little to do. So you had to make a bit of your own entertainment, and also getting any kind of phone. We were allowed 1 phone call home a week. And the interesting thing was, just before the World Cup, because I'd done really well with Everton, there was a little bit of interest from Barcelona. And I had a conversation with my agent before I went, and I said, right, I'm going to the World Cup. I don't want any distraction. He went, that's absolutely right. Totally understand. So we get through to the quarterfinal. We beat Paraguay, and I'd scored 3 against Poland. I scored 2 against Paraguay. And then we've now got to play against Argentina in the quarterfinals. And we're all sitting in the room, and someone comes in and says, there's a phone call for you at reception. And I was like, oh my God, a phone call. Wow, it's incredible. So I go there and I went, hello. He said, it was my agent, John Holmes, who still looks after me to this day. So he said, I know we had an agreement that I wouldn't bother you during the World Cup. He said, but situation has arisen, and I think it's only right that I call you about it. He said, I've had Barcelona on the phone because I'd obviously just scored a few goals. They're pretty quiet in the start of the tournament when I was hopeless. So he said, they've come on and they've said, we want Gary. He's got to sign, and he's got to agree to sign now. Otherwise it's off. He said, so I felt like I had to tell you. I said, I can't do that now. Imagine if I signed for Barcelona during the World Cup. I'll be hung, drawn and quartered when I get home. I said, if they want me now, they'll want me at the end of the tournament. And he went, that's absolutely the answer I needed to hear, but I wanted to tell you. So yeah, that was my 1 phone call, which is quite remarkable. I did eventually go to Barcelona.
And that's just before the game against Argentina.
A couple of days before, yeah.
So the famous quarterfinal against Argentina, how much were you and the team aware of the context that was provided both by footballing history and by political history?
We were made very aware because every single press conference, every single interview that we were doing, we were asked about, the Falklands conflict. Will that affect the game? Does it make it more important? And everybody was just trying to play it down. And so were the Argentinians as well. I saw Maradona interview before the game, but I think it added to it. And I honestly think, and I was having this conversation with a few friends the other day, I honestly think that game, the quarterfinal against Argentina, is the most, not necessarily the best, but certainly I think the most famous game in the history of football. I mean, people will come and throw other things at me, and I think it was a World Cup quarterfinal. It was just a few years after the war in the Falklands. You got the greatest goal probably ever scored.
Yeah.
And also the most infamous goal ever scored, the hand of God.
So just for people who don't know anything about football, just explain why it's so famous and why those two goals are so significant.
Well, it was two of the big powers in world football. It was post the war. And the game featured Diego Armando Maradona, who was the best footballer on earth by quite some distance at the time. And it was goalless in the first half. Wasn't a very good game. And then the second half, the ball gets flicked back by Steve Hodge, who claims to this day that it was a deliberate back pass, but I don't know how, I'm not sure. And Diego Maradona comes up, goes as low he's going to head it, and then punches it into the net. Now, the referee didn't see it. The linesman, I think, did, but didn't have the nerve to give it. He's subsequently written a book where he did say he thought he handballed it, but he didn't have the nerve to give the decision. And they led 1-0. And then just a few minutes later, Maradona picks the ball up on the halfway line, does a wriggle, does a turn, does a twist, beats 1, beats 2, beats 3, beats 4, beats 5, goes round Peter Shilton and knocks it in the back of the net on a pitch that was like a cabbage patch. So how he did that was just defied belief. I've said this many times, but it's the one time in my life where I thought I should probably applaud a goal. I didn't because I'd been given hell at home. So, and after that, we came back. John Barnes came on, whipped the ball across. I got the goal that no one remembers in that game. And
everybody remembers that goal.
Yeah, we all remember that.
Thank you very much. In England, they might remember. And then just a couple of minutes before the end of the game, Barnes again gets down the left, crosses the ball in, and I think I'm going to score. I head it, and from somewhere, I think it was Lineker, the left back for Argentina, jumps on, hits the back of his head and goes out, and we lost the game. But to have a game that was post a war between two countries, B, in a World Cup and a knockout game in a quarter-final, to have the best goal ever scored and probably the most impudent goal ever scored.
Yeah.
I think it's the most famous game ever.
Yeah.
Hand of God.
It was brilliant. He not only said that, he said it was a little bit the head of Maradona and a little bit the hand of God. I mean, what a brilliant line to think of at the end of that.
And Maradona, I mean, so I would guess even our listeners who despise football will definitely have heard of Maradona. I mean, Maradona is one of probably the two most famous footballers who ever lived with Pelé. And I guess you've met him a lot, haven't you? Because you've interviewed him. I think you've been to Argentina to meet him.
I did a documentary with him for 2 or 3 days in his company, and his life was just extraordinary. He had his issues with addiction, and we lost him just a couple of years ago, sadly. But he was an amazing individual, hugely charismatic, and unbelievably talented. Certainly for your American, he's kind of like the Michael Jordan of football in many ways.
But kind of more than that, because to Argentinians, I get the sense that, so he's from the streets. He was that urchin. So he's the sort of the representative.
He was 5'4".
But also he'd beaten the Anglo-Saxon pirates that Argentina had always blamed. Going back to the 19th century, they'd sort of resented Britain. And he hadn't just beat us with a good goal, but he'd outsmarted us with a bad goal, as it were.
He gets, I think that in Argentina, he gets as much credit for punching the ball in the net because they think that was the ultimate in trickery and skullduggery. And I think they love that aspect of it. Whereas we wouldn't even, I wouldn't even think of to have done that. I mean, I could have done that with that cross at the end, to be perfectly honest. If I'd known the fellow was coming in, I could have punched it in, but it wouldn't cross my mind to
We're just too sporting, aren't we, Gary? Yeah. That's the trouble.
Well, it's the Corinthian spirit, Dominic, that you were talking about.
It never gets you anywhere, does it?
So we got knocked out.
So, exactly.
But Maradona also hugely popular in Naples. He plays in Naples.
Well, he played for Naples. He played for Napoli, and they won Serie A for the first time ever in their history.
So there's a shrine to him. I saw a shrine. They got one of his hairs.
I've seen that.
Well, when I spent the 2 or 3 days with him in Buenos Aires, I went to his home. We had a barbecue, and then we went to watch a game. We went to watch Boca Juniors play at La Bombonera, and it was an extraordinary experience. It was like, when you watch a film, Life of Brian, for example, when they're all following the Messiah. It was like that. People came from everywhere and treated him like this god, and they're crying at his feet. And I'm thinking, how can you live like this every day? Everywhere he goes was like, and we went up, and he has his own box at the Bombonera where Boca Juniors play, which is his team. And we go up there, and as soon as he stands on it, like a balcony, like a kind of like Caesar, looking at his feet. And the whole crowd starts singing and jumping, and he's leaning over the balcony. He's leaning over so much that his daughter, I remember, was holding him to try to make sure they didn't fall off the edge of the balcony. He was the most spectacular, and it was mad, really, because I played in an era of, with wonderful players, like Zico and people like Platini, but these fellows were so good, but he was on a completely different level again. He was that good.
Yeah.
So the next World Cup is 1990, and that's in Italy. So Maradona, again, to an extent, is,
he's a key figure, isn't he?
He's a key figure. But this is a time when the England team is notorious for hooliganism, troubles with hooliganism, endless calls to bring back the birch from outraged Tory MPs and so on. And so you get penned in Sardinia, don't you? The group with England. We did.
That's where the draw put us. I don't know whether it was deliberate to try and stick us on a little island to keep our supporters away. But I mean, obviously, my whole career was played constantly with the backdrop of hooliganism of our England fans. That some of them, not all of them, obviously, a small percentage, but would go follow the England team anywhere to try and have a fight and cause trouble. And it was pretty grim. I've seen, there were various trips abroad where I witnessed it myself, and it was, I just never really could get my head around it. But yes,
but the England team in that tournament, you won the good. Was it the Good Behaviour Award or whatever? You got a gold star for being the best behaved or something.
Yeah, amazing.
So that was a small conversation. But I guess, so the 1990 World Cup is the middle class World Cup, having talked about the hooliganism, and it's the one where middle class people start following it. Opera, Pavarotti, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. In the UK, I think certainly in England, I think it was also almost a watershed moment in many ways. I think things changed quite a lot. We'd also had Hillsborough, we'd had Heysel in recent times. Two terrible tragedies within stadiums. So we were coming. Also, England clubs were banned from Europe because of what happened at Heysel. So we came from a period, really, of the absolute doldrums for football. It was, hooliganism was rife. Spectators were down. There weren't that many people going to watch football.
Stadia were falling
apart.
Yeah.
And then suddenly we had 1990, and people fell in love with football again because we went long into the tournament. We had amazing moments, Platt scoring, incredible volley in the 120th minute, which is the last minute of extra time, to send us through against Belgium. Then we played Cameroon. I got a couple of penalties and we sneaked through in that one. Then we played Germany, and we were unlucky and we ended up losing on a penalty shootout. But it was like people fell in love with football again. It wasn't just the working class. All of a sudden, we get mobbed in the streets when we came home, and
Gaza,
women and young people,
Gaza's tears,
and Gaza's tears. Gaza was obviously given a yellow card. He's second in the tournament in the semi-final against Germany, which meant that he would missed the final. Should we make the final? Which obviously we didn't because we lost in the penalty shootout. And there was a moment where I looked at the bench and it became the question I was most asked. What were you saying? And I just kind of gave a look with my eye to Bobby Robson and said, like, have a word with him. Keep an eye on him, because Gaza was starting to cry because he knew he wouldn't play in the final if we made it. But he actually rallied and did really well in extra time.
So, Gary, that's against Germany. And in our last episode, we were talking about the shadow of the Second World War. So when Germany won in 1954 against Hungary, all the press coverage in Britain, in France, and elsewhere was about this was the resurgence of the Nazis.
Well, Hungary were top in that final.
They were indeed. In 1974, also Germany behind against the Dutch. They beat the Dutch. Again, it's the shadow of the war hangs very heavy, particularly for some Dutch players who'd lost family in the war. And then in 90, I mean, certainly from my perspective, having watched it, I remember the huge sort of upsurge of anti-German sentiment in England among people in my generation who had never talked about it before, who felt, the thought that the Germans of all people had beaten us on penalties.
Well, we do get a little bit obsessed with the Germans in this.
But did you feel that at all as players?
Well, let me put it this way: the night before the World Cup semi-final, England against Germany, we had a team meeting. Bobby Robson called a team meeting, and it was just before the other semi-final, which was taking place the night before our game, which was Italy against Maradona's Argentina in Naples, where Maradona ends up scoring a penalty in the shootout, and they knock the Italians out in his hometown. Not quite his hometown, but you know what I mean. But we had this team meeting. Now, as I said earlier, so often in tournaments, there's not a lot going on. It's quite dull. So we try and entertain ourselves. For example, I always used to run a book, like a bookmaker, and we did all the players have bets on the football matches. We'd have race nights where our physio used to bring in tapes of race meetings. And I knew how to run a book because I did it at Leicester Racecourse when I was about 16, 17 for a couple of years for a bookie. So I knew how to do that. And my roommate was Peter Shilton. So he helped me do it. And we were called Honest Links and Shilts. And we did all this betting. And on the night before the England-Germany game, we had this meeting. Bobby Robson called it. He was a little bit late, as he often was, but he always used to have one of those big paper clipboards. And before he came, I got the big marker pen and I wrote on it, even money, he mentions the war. So, and then I turned the page back over about the clip. So, and then Bobby Robson eventually comes in. Oh, sorry, I'm late, lads. And then he stood at the front, and his first words were, "We beat them in the war." And the place was in uproar. Everyone's clapping. He's going, what's going on? What's going on? And someone said, "Look at the clipboard." So he said, "Turn it over." He turned over the page and he went, "Lineker, you bastard."
So there were some people in your team who were very patriotic. I mean, the most famous example,
I think we're all patriotic. We show it in different ways.
Terry Butcher, who literally bled for his country, didn't he?
Yeah, I remember played Yugoslavia in one game. Terry Butcher was this. I mean, he's about 6'4". Terry, he's huge, big central defender, frightening bloke. And I remember we played Yugoslavia. We had to get at least a point, and we went out. It was a qualifier for Euros, I think. And so we were in the tunnel before the game, and in the middle between the two teams, they had this like wire mesh kind of fence, bizarre thing. And I'll never forget that Terry Butcher went over it and he shook it. It was like, "Come on, Cage Tigers!" And he's like, and they you could see them shrink on the other side. They were terrifying. But yeah, I'm obviously fiercely patriotic. But do you really think in 1990 young men going out to play in a World Cup were actually bothered about what had happened previously in the war?
Although the hooligans were, right? Because the hooligans still sing.
Or
do you think that's just a performance?
I think it's a performance, but I think we fans do sing songs to this day about various things that they shouldn't be singing about, really.
So the final is West Germany, and it's the last time that it's West Germany rather than Germany, because, of course, the Berlin Wall had come down the year before, against Argentina. They can't both lose. Who do you want to win?
That's a really good question. I actually went to that final to receive the aforementioned, remarkably wonderful FIFA Fair Play Award, which I received with Bobby Robson. So I went to that game. It was the most dire game. So, but in the end, Germany went through a penalty from Andy Bremer, who took a penalty in the shootout against England with one foot, I think the left, and then in the final took it with his other foot, which for a is quite an imaginable thing to do.
That's
but
German
they
cunning,
won.
Tom.
They won by one. I didn't really care who won, to be honest.
Right.
Okay, I think we should take a break here, and when we come back, perhaps we could look at some of the kind of the broad themes over the past 30 years in the World Cup. So, increasing globalisation, sinister despots taking over the World Cup, all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
So, we will be back with the most recent decades of the World Cup. This episode is brought to you by Rocket Money.
Tom, we often talk about how to organise our finances. I'm very conscious that I'm paying for a lot of mad subscriptions. And there's one thing that we've talked about often on this show. It's the thing that we probably hate more than any other, and it's a hidden fee. I would love to get my finances under control. There are all these things piling up on our bank statements, and I think I need to fix this problem. I need to sort this out and to stop this.
I mean, my finances are so chaotic that I need this app.
So I'll tell you what it is. It's called Rocket Money. It's a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions. It monitors your spending and it helps to lower your bills so that you can grow your savings.
With Rocket Money, you can track all of your subscriptions and you can easily cancel within the app with just a few taps, saving you time, avoiding charges. And you can also set budgets and goals and get personalized insights and regular reports to track how you're doing. They will even send you real-time alerts for large transactions, upcoming bills, refunds, and even low balances. So let Rocket Money help you reach your financial goals faster. Join at rocketmoney.com/ishistory.
That's rocketmoney.com/ishistory. rocketmoney.com/ishistory.
This episode is brought to you by the Financial Times. I think we both agree, Dominic, that in the clamour of countless voices competing to break the news and telling you the what, the who, and the where on these stories, there's often something missing, isn't there?
There is, Tom, because I think to get a true understanding of any story, you really need to know why. Take FT journalism. It goes deeper, providing the insight, analysis, and perspective to help you see the whole story and truly understand the issues that matter. Why did it happen? Why is it important? And why will it matter? I've got a brilliant example. So they had an article recently, a fascinating article about why populism became popular. And this Financial Times article absolutely delved into that. It was so interesting.
And does it nail it?
Yeah, it nailed it. Absolutely nailed it. And it really made me look at populism in a new light.
Well, if you're interested in the why, we have good news.
Yes, listeners to The Rest is History can save more than 40% on an annual digital subscription to the Financial Times by visiting ft.com/history. For the why, Financial Times. Welcome back to The Rest is History with our guest, Gary Lineker. Gary, Tom kicked off the very first episode with a brilliantly moving reading from a very popular newspaper by me about the World Cup and corruption and just looking very, very broadly at the last few decades before we get into the individual stories. Do you think the World Cup has sold its soul, as it were?
Well, we've had enormous corruption issues. I think the tournament itself is still magical. I think it's the greatest sporting event of all, personally, but I'm slightly biased, obviously, as a football man. But yes, of course, it's incredibly global these days, incredibly powerful, corporate as well, and there's a massive amount of money. Now, where there's a massive amount of money, there's often corruption. Where there's money, there's muck, whatever it is. So yes, we've had that to a great degree, much to the detriment of football.
My favourite corrupt figure was Chuck Blazer.
Oh, well, he's a remarkable bloke.
Who was the American FIFA representative, wasn't he? He was about 200 stone.
I think he ended up getting paid for a couple of apartments in New York where he would be in one, but I think it was all paid for by FIFA and stuff. I think he had an apartment. He had a separate apartment for his cats. Yeah, yeah. I mean,
that's very kind of Roman Emperor, isn't it, Tom?
It really is a bit. It was remarkable. I went to the notorious 2010 what they call the bidding finale in Switzerland when they decided to go with Russia and Qatar as the two bids. I wasn't part of the England bid team. I'd been left out of that, but somebody had got wind of the fact that I knew Michel Platini and that I played golf with him, and thought it might be a good idea if I flew out the night before and came and had a chat with one or two of the committee members of FIFA. I said, "When your country calls," so I went there. But there was already like Prince William and David Cameron and David Beckham and all these people. And it was a strange thing. Is that all these committee members were all around this hotel room. There's Chuck Blazer and all these dreadful. Some of them were, and we were sat there, and I was thinking, where are all the people from the other bidding countries? There's no one else here. And I remember we had a burger. I sat down with a burger with David Beckham afterwards, as you do. And I said to him, this is a bit odd, isn't it? There's only us here. Do you not think this is like already been done and decided? And so it proved, because England didn't even get past the first vote and the way they do it. And then it ended up being Russia, which, Russia had a strong bid, and then the remarkable thing came out the hat for the 2022 World Cup, which is where we are now, of the name Qatar. And it was like, what? And that's when, you kind of absolutely knew that there was deep corruption.
So you went when you were involved in the media, you went to the United States in '94. Is that right?
I didn't actually. I was playing in Japan at the time, at my end of career, and I did a bit of punditry for 2 weeks, but it was from London. And
right, yeah.
So we did do it around that World Cup, but I wasn't there.
So that's the first World Cup, really, where they're clearly trying to kind of evangelize. Yeah, yes. They're trying to take it to somewhere where. I mean, do you think that's what they should be doing, spreading the gospel of football, or do you think it should be happening in places where people actually care about football?
It's a good question. I mean, they've got it again in the next World Cup, sharing it with Mexico and Canada. But no, I have no problem with it going around the world. America's a strange one. People say that, they're not interested, and it's not there. It's obviously not in their top 4 sports. So I didn't feel like it was. If I was a player, it wouldn't be the one where I would have wanted to go at that particular point to play, but I'd just kind of finished. So yeah, whilst it's good that it's global, and I agree with that, I think, I think it's important to be in countries really that do at least like football a little bit. I
mean, there's not being interested in football, and then there's being so obsessed by football that when one of your players scores an own goal,
well, that's,
you shoot him. So the most notorious episode in the '94 World Cup in America is when Colombia lose to the United States, and get knocked out, and Andres Escobar scores. He scores an own goal, and he gets shot by the chauffeur of 2 Medellin gangsters, I think. And
it's indescribable, isn't it?
Because the reason why the World Cup matters is that passions are so high, but does that episode kind of hang as a warning to everyone in world football as to how far it could go?
Well, it shouldn't, obviously. To do something like that to one of your players for just basically making a mistake. I mean, it's not like he deliberately scored an own goal or anything like that. But no, I mean, it's a staggering story that people. I mean, yes, we all care and we get passionate and we want our country to do well in sport, but in football for me in particular. But it's just unimaginable that it could lead to something like that.
A terrible thing he said. This was before he said, in football, unlike bullfighting, there is no death. In football, no one dies, no one gets killed.
He said that. I haven't seen.
Terrible, yeah. Terrible thing to have said.
But I suppose it's an example, isn't it, of how football. There's always a slight sense that people try to create that football is just entertainment and escapism from the world. I mean, obviously that's why so many of us love football, because as fans. But you can't ever escape it. I mean, so to go back to your story about that meeting in South Africa, the 2018 World Cup was awarded to Russia.
Russia, yeah.
And by the time, in the intervening period, Russia had taken Crimea and had become involved in Eastern Ukraine.
Yeah.
Then the World Cup happens in Russia. I mean, you went to Russia, didn't you? You went to the Kremlin and did the
I did the draw for FIFA at that stage, which was in the Kremlin. It's funny, I was asked to meet Putin a couple of times and refused because of obviously what was going on. And I think it was quite a good decision now.
Yeah. I bet you're glad there's no photos.
And it was, but it was amazing to get behind the scenes in the Kremlin. I was like in a solid gold dressing room.
Mm-hmm. What happens if I press this red button? Whoops.
Yeah, I know. And it was funny because I was hosting it and they had like 8 representatives of the countries that had won the World Cup to actually pull the balls out of the pot. And we rehearsed for 3 days because it was incredibly complicated, the draw. Because this continent couldn't play against this continent. You couldn't play that. You had certain amounts. So we had 3 days rehearsals. And when they said 3 days rehearsal, I thought, really? Is that necessary? But it was. And the draw went quite well. And Maradona was doing the draw. He didn't turn up for the rehearsals. He just came at the end because he's Diego. And I remember he drew the first one out and he picked it out with his hand. And I went, oh, the hand of God strikes again. And he laughed at that. And then it was funny because he came up to me after the draw and it went really well. It went pretty smoothly, thankfully. And he came up to me and he went, Gary, he gave me a big hug. And because obviously I knew because I filmed with him before. And he said, Gary, he said, you're so good at this. He said, you were quite a good footballer. He said, but if you were as good at football as you are at doing this, he said, you might have been nearly as good as me.
Oh my word.
And I loved that.
What a lad. What a lad.
But you didn't. So looking back at that now, do you think the World Cup shouldn't have gone to Russia in 2018?
I mean, Russia is a good footballing country, and it's just, and often, but we hate their politics and hate their leadership, and we obviously hate what's happened subsequently. I mean, I was more worried about the Qatar one because that was obviously bought.
Yeah.
But the Russia one was a reasonable bid. But I thought our bid was much stronger, and I'm sure. I mean, there's been no evidence of corruption, and particularly on the Russian one. Beyond, I mean, basically everybody does bribes in a World Cup bid. It's changed a little bit now.
Well, those cats don't get housed.
Well, that's it.
On their own, do they?
I know. So, I mean, but no, I don't think. I mean, the World Cup actually in Russia was really good, and the place was sanitized, and it was everyone was looked after properly, But for the people of Russia, I would say, yes, it was nice, great for them to have the World Cup and that they really enjoyed it. Politically, though, I mean, there are so many instances in the history of the World Cup where you could go, politically, we shouldn't really have had it there. You talked, I remember you had the 1934 World Cup with the backdrop of Mussolini wanting it to support fascism and things like that. So we've had lots. 78 in Argentina, the military junta there was awful.
Yeah, because I don't think that's any better than Qatar getting it.
No,
no, that's my point. There's always something. 2014 in Brazil, there were massive demonstrations on the streets for people saying, why are we investing in stadia when we should be investing in social care? So they took to the streets, and so I'm kind of experienced with that. But at the same time, looking at Qatar, that's
But just
that whole thing was bought.
Just to play devil's advocate. So the World Cup's been held in Japan and South Korea.
Yeah.
In 2002. So that was Asia's first World Cup, and it was held in South Africa. So that was Africa's first World Cup. Qatar is the first Muslim country to host it, and so if it's a genuinely World Cup, isn't there a case for saying that it should go to regions of the world that are not South America or Europe?
No, I absolutely agree with that. I think, but you could have had something in a Middle Eastern World Cup. But I think the issue obviously there's human rights issues. There's issues around every World Cup, wherever it is. We always have this build up, but at the minute there's this whole sport washing concept where people try and get respect because they kind of buy it through sport. We've had lots of meetings about this going into this World Cup and how we cover it and how we do this and that. and we meetings with Amnesty International, and they sort of sport washing works if you stop talking about the issues. So we'll keep raising the issues. But do I think it should be there? No. Did I think it should be in Russia? No. But how many countries in the world? Obviously there are different levels of human rights issues and whether you've invaded someone and stuff like this, but you'd probably limit yourself quite drastically if you wanted everyone to be holier than thou. But that's not saying that, there are different levels of human rights issues.
And what about this issue? So, the first, you talked about 1970. So that's a World Cup of 16 teams. And it's quite a simple structure. The World Cup's now 32, I think.
Yeah. And it's going to be about 700, isn't it?
Yeah, it's ever more.
48, the next one.
It's ever more kind of baroque. And it kind of, and there is a definite sense. Now, maybe some people listening to this will say, oh, these are just like old men moaning. But there's a definite sense, moaning. I would say, never, that the specialness has already rather been lost. That there are a lot of matches that don't matter. That there are a lot of teams that turn up for 2 weeks and then go home. That it's bigger and bloated, and therefore has lost some of the magic that it had.
I disagree to a degree on that. I don't think there are many meaningless matches because obviously you've got the group stage unless you win your first 2 games. I mean, you will get games in the last stage of that group that are fairly meaningless.
I watched with Tom in 2006. We went to the pub and we watched Ukraine versus Saudi Arabia. I think.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Oh, good for you.
0-0, Gary.
It's 0-0 thriller.
I can assure you that was a meaningless match.
No, you will get meaningless games and obviously occasionally, but once you reach the knockout stage of the last 16, then it's all wonderfully exciting. I think I've been to football in some of the even the last World Cup, we had some fantastic football matches. There was some brilliant games, and football, I think, is better than the actual sport itself is better than it's ever been because of some good law changes, and you can't just kick people everywhere now. The playing surfaces are beautiful, which make for better football. We've got some wonderfully gifted footballers right around the world. Politically, obviously there are issues, massive issues, which we've talked about. But football-wise, I think, and it's a World Cup, so to give more people, more countries the chance to play in it.
Yeah.
You can't imagine how massive that is for a small nation to be suddenly playing in the World Cup.
I was reading about the South Korea who, when they staged the World Cup, they got to the semi-finals, and the South Korean president said of that it was Korea's happiest day since Dan Gun, who was the son of a bear and the creator of acupuncture, founded the country in 2333 BC.
Crazy.
Wow. So he was. Hang on a minute. He was the son of a bear.
Apparently, yes.
That's amazing.
We sometimes have facts on this podcast, Gary, that turn out not to be quite true.
Not necessarily true. That may well be one of them. But just to end, the justification for doing the World Cup on a history podcast is that it holds a mirror up to changing patterns in geopolitics. And I guess that one thing you could say about Qatar hosting it is that it is doing that. I mean, it is inconceivable that in, 1990 or let alone kind of 1950, that Qatar would ever stage it. And it in a way, it's reflective of the kind of shifts in global power, global wealth, all kinds of things like that.
I think it's a reflection of that, isn't it? There's no question about that. I mean, it wouldn't, as you say, 30, probably even 20 years ago, they wouldn't have been thought of. But 12 years ago, it was decided it was going to be there to the shock of the world. But it is there. And obviously, it's a very, very important part of the world now. Incredibly wealthy. The Qataris own, most of London, don't they, as well?
And they've got a lot of gas.
So that's where it is, because money talks, doesn't it?
Right, and it always will. So in other words, in 20 years' time,
it always will, whether you like it or not.
The World Cup will be somewhere else. The people are, presumably it'll be a Chinese World Cup within the next 20 or 30 years.
Well, so that's the other question I wanted. Is that if it's a World Cup, 2 massive countries are missing from the World Cup: China and India. So I think India did qualify, didn't they, for one World Cup, and they weren't allowed to play barefoot, so they refused to turn up.
I think that's a slight myth, but they didn't turn up.
I think that sounds a bit like a myth.
They didn't turn up.
It's like the son of a bear kind of myth, that one, isn't it?
So can it really be a World Cup without, say, China and India?
Well, there's qualifying, so they go through that stage. So every country in the world takes part in the qualifying. So they have been part of the World Cup process. I mean, China have played in World Cups, obviously, and they're not. It's not probably their biggest sport, but it's growing. In India, it's starting to grow as well to a degree. So
time will tell.
But there are countries that are not as interested in football as elsewhere. But it's probably the most global sport, certainly team sport, really.
So, Gary, this has been brilliant. It's strange to think that if your career had turned out differently, we'd have been doing this podcast with Mark Haley. But
thank heavens he left Mark Haley out and kept me in the side.
So we've just had to make do with you.
Yeah, but I'm terribly sorry. I can only apologise.
Before we let you go, it would be remiss not to ask you for a few special predictions for Rest is History listeners. So, first of all, the finalists. The
finalists in this World Cup coming up.
Yeah.
It's really open, this one. I think there's no obvious. It's a World Cup like we've never had before. It's unique. It's in the middle of a domestic lead season, certainly in Europe and a lot of other countries. We've never had a Winter World Cup, Northern Hemisphere Winter World Cup. So it's going to be difficult. And there's lots of players are getting injured. I would have probably tipped France, but they've lost Kante, they've lost Varane, they've lost Pogba. Other countries have lost big players too. I suspect we might get a South American winner. It's been 20 years since Brazil won in Japan, Korea. And Argentina have not lost a game for around 3.5 years. Brazil, always strong. The European teams, England have a chance. We do have a chance. It's a little bit light in central defence. Germany always have a chance because they're German. But they've not really got a striker, but France have won it in the past. France could easily still win it, or they could implode. Spain have got a chance, but they're a bit young and not great up front. So I actually, if I had to say, I'd probably go either Brazil or Argentina.
So, and would you like to see Lionel Messi? So Messi, for those, I mean, surely everyone knows who Messi is.
I would hope so.
Certainly arguably the most talented player who's ever lived.
Yeah, I never thought I'd see a better player than Diego Maradona. I'm not saying Messi is a better player than Maradona, but I never thought anyone would compare, and they're so similar. And if I had to choose, I'd probably give it Messi because of longevity of career. Mm-hmm. And obviously Maradona had his issues which affected his career, and Messi never has. If England don't win it or don't get to the final, I would love to see Messi do it for Argentina. It's pretty much the only trophy he's not won.
Yeah.
And he's won this Copa America. He did that not 18 months ago, which was amazing for him because he'd lost in 3-4 major finals. But he's an unbelievable player. For me, it's just joyous to watch.
So the rest is football predictions.
Yeah.
Gary, thanks so much.
The official Rest is History predictions.
I'm useless at predicting anything.
No, but I like the fact we've done 3 episodes on the history of the World Cup, and we've ended up with predictions, and now we can see whether they come true or not.
There you go.
So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
Absolute pleasure.
Thanks everyone to listening. And we have coming up 32 episodes, not about football, but about aspects of the history of every single country that is playing in this World Cup.
Every country in the World Cup, we do its history in the next 32 episodes, Gary. And
wow.
they'll run.
Hats off to you guys. That's amazing.
One a day. So
I'll be listening. It'll give me a lot of good lines for my World Cup, hopefully, and good when I'm presenting.
When we come back to you in 32 days' time and we say, Gary, tell us about the Costa Rican Civil War, you will be enormously well informed.
Do you not think I already know everything about that?
Yeah. Oh, great. We should have had
Dr. Valverde.
Don't test me.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to The Rest is History. For bonus episodes, early access, ad-free listening, and access to our chat community, please sign up at restishistorypod.com. That's restishistorypod.com.